Sarah Mitchell adjusted her reading glasses and took another sip of her lukewarm coffee. The digital clock on her desk displayed 2:47 a.m. station time, but she had long ago stopped paying attention to normal sleep schedules. Being the head librarian at Nexus Prime Research Station meant keeping odd hours, especially when the galaxy's greatest minds needed obscure references at the strangest times. The archive room hummed quietly around her, its walls lined with data crystals containing knowledge from thousands of worlds. Sarah had worked here for 7 years, and she loved every moment of it. While other humans sought glory as pilots or merchants, she found her purpose in organizing information and helping researchers find what they needed. Most aliens barely noticed her presence, which suited her just fine. She preferred the company of books and databases to crowded social gatherings. Tonight, she was reorganizing the linguistics section, a task she had been putting off for months. As she scanned through countless data crystals, one caught her attention. The label was faded and written in Old Galactic Standard, barely readable. Fragment collection, unknown origin. Caution, pattern recognition hazard. Sarah frowned. Pattern recognition hazard? That was an unusual warning. Her curiosity piqued. She inserted the crystal into her reader. The screen filled with images of symbols, thousands of them, arranged in complex patterns that seemed to shift and move as she looked at them. According to the attached notes, these symbols had been discovered on 17 different dead worlds scattered across the galaxy, all belonging to civilizations that had mysteriously vanished approximately 50,000 years ago. The mystery that stumped everyone. The file contained research notes from over 300 years of failed attempts to decode the symbols. The greatest linguistic minds from dozens of species had tried everything: mathematical analysis, quantum semantic processing, temporal linguistics, even attempts to contact the symbols through psychic means. Nothing had worked. The symbols remained stubbornly incomprehensible, their meaning locked behind barriers no one could breach. What made the mystery more frustrating was the consistency. The same symbols appeared across all 17 worlds, suggesting a single civilization or at least a shared communication system. The archaeological evidence showed these civilizations had achieved remarkable technological advancement before their sudden disappearance. Understanding their language could unlock secrets that might revolutionize galactic society. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying the symbols on her screen. They were beautiful in a strange way, flowing and organic yet mathematically precise. As she looked at them, something nagged at the back of her mind. They reminded her of something, but she couldn't quite place what. She pulled up the detailed analysis reports. The Vrexian cryptographers had approached the symbols as a mathematical cipher. The Turulian linguists had treated them as a standard phonetic alphabet. The Korvathi pattern specialists had analyzed them as geometric representations of concepts. All had failed because the symbols refused to behave according to any known linguistic or mathematical framework. Maybe that's the problem, Sarah muttered to herself. Everyone's trying to make them fit existing frameworks instead of understanding them on their own terms. An unexpected connection. She continued reading through the research notes while absently eating her sandwich, tuna on rye bread, her usual late-night meal. As she chewed, her eyes kept returning to one particular cluster of symbols. The arrangement was distinctive, 3 curved lines intersecting with 4 straight ones, surrounded by smaller symbols that seemed to orbit the central pattern. Sarah paused mid-bite. Orbiting. The word triggered something in her memory. She set down her sandwich and pulled up another database, this one containing human cultural archives. Specifically, she searched for something she'd seen years ago, during her undergraduate studies in library science. There it was, an ancient human system called the Dewey Decimal Classification, created centuries before humanity reached the stars. It was one of the first comprehensive systems for organizing knowledge, using numbers to represent categories and subcategories of information. But that wasn't what interested Sarah. What caught her attention was a lesser-known variant created by a librarian named Margaret Chen in the early 22nd century. Chen had been frustrated with traditional classification systems and had developed her own method using visual symbols instead of numbers. She called it spatial knowledge mapping. the system used flowing lines and geometric shapes to represent how different pieces of knowledge related to each other, creating a kind of map where information orbited around central concepts based on relevance and connection. The system had never caught on because it was too complex for most people to use effectively. But Sarah had studied it extensively during her library training because she found it fascinating. And now, looking at the alien symbols with fresh eyes, she saw the resemblance was unmistakable. The breakthrough moment. "It's not a language at all," Sarah whispered, her heart racing with excitement. "It's a filing system. It's a library." She grabbed her tablet and started sketching frantically. If these symbols were indeed a knowledge organization system, then each symbol wasn't representing a word or a concept directly. Instead, it was showing relationships between different pieces of information. The curved lines showed connections, the straight lines showed hierarchies, and the smaller orbiting symbols showed related subtopics. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard as she began testing her hypothesis. She took one of the simpler symbol clusters and tried to interpret it as a classification system rather than a message. The central symbol represented a broad category, maybe something like physical sciences. The symbols connected to it by curved lines would be related fields like chemistry or physics. The orbiting symbols would be specific topics within those fields. The pattern held. As she worked through more examples, the logic became clear. This wasn't a written language meant for communication. It was a library catalog system designed to organize vast amounts of knowledge across multiple locations. The 17 dead worlds weren't separate civilizations. They were branch libraries of a single, massive knowledge network. Testing the theory, Sarah worked through the night, her coffee growing cold and forgotten as she decoded cluster after cluster of symbols. The system was elegant once you understood the underlying logic. The ancient civilization, whoever they were, had created a universal method for organizing information that transcended traditional language barriers. Anyone who understood the system could navigate their libraries regardless of what language they actually spoke. By 6 a.m., Sarah had successfully mapped out what appeared to be a complete catalog structure for one of the libraries. According to her interpretation, this particular facility had specialized in biological sciences, with major sections devoted to genetics, evolution, ecology, and something she tentatively translated as consciousness engineering. She needed to verify her findings with actual researchers, but she was confident she was right. The symbols made perfect sense once you stopped trying to read them as text and started treating them as a sophisticated classification system. It was exactly the kind of solution a civilization of librarians would create, a way to organize knowledge that would remain accessible even after languages changed or species evolved. Sarah stood and stretched, her back stiff from hours of sitting. Through the archive's windows, she could see the station beginning to wake up for the day cycle. Researchers would soon be arriving for their morning work sessions. She needed to decide what to do with her discovery. The sensible thing would be to write a formal report and submit it through proper channels. But Sarah knew how academic bureaucracy worked. Her findings would be reviewed, questioned, and tested for months or even years before anyone took them seriously. She was, after all, just a librarian with no formal training in xenolinguistics or archaeology. But what if she was right? What if these symbols really could unlock the knowledge stored in 17 ancient libraries scattered across the galaxy? The potential discoveries could be revolutionary. And if she waited for official approval, someone else might stumble onto the same solution. The decision to act. Sarah made her decision. She would test her theory properly before going public, but she wouldn't wait for permission. She pulled up the station directory and searched for Dr. Keelan Voss, the head of the archaeology department. He was an older Tyrolean with a reputation for being open-minded and willing to consider unconventional ideas. If anyone would listen to a librarian's theory about ancient alien symbols, it would be him. She composed a careful message explaining her discovery and requesting a meeting. She attached her preliminary analysis, but emphasized that this was just a starting point. that she needed access to the actual archaeological sites to verify her interpretations. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she returned to her work, documenting everything she had discovered. The symbols had stumped experts for 3 centuries, but Sarah had a feeling they were about to reveal their secrets. Not because she was smarter than everyone who had tried before, but because she had approached the problem from a completely different angle. Sometimes the answer to an impossible question wasn't found through advanced analysis or sophisticated algorithms. Sometimes it just took someone who understood how libraries worked. Someone who spent their days organizing information and helping people find what they needed. Someone like a librarian who had nothing better to do at 3 a.m. than follow her curiosity wherever it led. Sarah smiled as she looked at the symbols on her screen. No longer mysterious, but full of meaning and promise. The galaxy's greatest unsolved mystery was about to become the galaxy's greatest treasure trove of knowledge. And it had all started with a librarian, a forgotten data crystal, and a tuna sandwich during a quiet night shift. Dr. Kellen Voss arrived at the archive room 3 hours after Sarah sent her message, moving with the deliberate grace characteristic of Tyrillian elders. His scaled skin reflected the soft lighting, creating patterns of blue and silver that shifted as he moved. Behind him walked 2 of his research assistants, both looking skeptical about this early morning summons. "Ms. Mitchell," Dr. Voss said, his voice carrying the musical quality of his species, "your message was quite extraordinary. You understand that the crypt code, as we call these symbols, has resisted every attempt at translation for over 300 years? "I do, Dr. Voss," Sarah replied, gesturing for them to sit at the conference table she had prepared. "But I don't think it's a code at all. I think everyone has been asking the wrong question." One of the assistants, a young Corvati named Solara, couldn't hide her skepticism. "With respect, Miss Mitchell, I have read your credentials. You are a librarian, not a trained linguist or cryptographer. What makes you think you succeeded where thousands of experts failed?" "Exactly because I'm a librarian," Sarah said firmly. "Everyone else has been trying to read these symbols. I tried to catalog them." She activated the holographic display and brought up her analysis. "Look at this cluster here. Dr. Voss, you have studied the archaeological sites personally. Tell me, where was this particular symbol grouping found?" Dr. Voss examined the display carefully. "This is from the facility on Kepler 442b, in what we believe was a central tamer. We found it inscribed on a large crystalline structure, surrounded by thousands of smaller data storage devices." "Exactly," Sarah said, her excitement building. "It wasn't a message on a wall. It was a card catalog. This symbol here," she pointed to the central element, "doesn't represent a word. It represents a classification category. These flowing lines show connections to related topics. The orbiting symbols are subcategories." She pulled up more examples, walking them through her interpretation step by step. As she spoke, she watched Dr. Voss's expression change from polite skepticism to genuine interest. His assistants leaned forward, studying the symbols with new eyes. The pattern emerges. The civilization that created these wasn't trying to communicate through writing, Sarah continued. They were archivists, knowledge keepers on a galactic scale. They built libraries across multiple worlds and needed a universal system to organize information that would work regardless of what languages individual species spoke. Dr. Voss was quiet for a long moment. His inner eyelids flickering in a pattern Sarah had learned indicated deep thought. Finally, he spoke. "This is either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. But your interpretation does explain several anomalies that have puzzled us for years." "Such as?" Sarah asked. "The distribution of the symbols," Zilara answered, her earlier skepticism fading. "We have always wondered why certain symbol patterns appear consistently in specific types of structures. If these are organizational markers rather than text, that pattern makes perfect sense. The symbols would be placed where they are needed for navigation and classification." The other assistant, a human named Dr. James Park, pulled up additional data on his tablet. "Miss Mitchell, if you're correct, this changes everything. The facilities we have been treating as ancient cities or temples would actually be libraries. The artifacts we have been cataloging as religious objects or decorative art might be information storage devices." "That's my theory," Sarah confirmed. "And if I'm right, Those storage devices should still be readable once we understand the organizational system. The knowledge hasn't been lost. It's been sitting in filing cabinets for 50,000 years, waiting for someone to understand the Dewey Decimal System. Dr. Voss stood and began pacing, a habit Sarah had observed in many researchers when they were processing new ideas. We need to test this immediately. The nearest crypt facility is on Arcturus 7, about 4 days' travel from here. If we can verify your interpretation on site, it would be the most significant archaeological discovery in galactic history. I want to come with you, Sarah said quickly. I know my theory sounds strange, but I'm the one who understands how the classification system works. You'll need me there to navigate the catalog structure. 4 days later, Sarah found herself standing on the surface of Arcturus 7, staring at structures that had been ancient before humanity discovered fire. The facility was smaller than some of the others, but remarkably well preserved. Crystalline spires rose from the rocky ground, their surfaces covered in the flowing symbols that had mystified researchers for centuries. Dr. Voss had assembled a team of 20 specialists representing multiple disciplines. There were linguists, archaeologists, data recovery experts, and even a quantum physicist whose theories about dimensional data storage might prove relevant. They all looked at Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. She was, after all, just a librarian proposing to solve a mystery that had defeated their predecessors. According to Ms. Mitchell's interpretation, Dr. Voss announced to the assembled team, this facility should be organized around a central classification nexus. Sarah, where would you expect to find the main catalog? Sarah studied the layout of the structures, comparing them to her mapped understanding of the symbol system. There, she pointed to a larger building at the center of the complex. That should be the reference desk. Several team members chuckled at her terminology, but Dr. Voss nodded approvingly. Let's find out. Inside the central structure, they found exactly what Sarah had predicted, a large chamber with a crystalline pillar at its center, covered in symbols arranged in a clear hierarchical pattern. Surrounding it were smaller stations, each marked with symbols that Sarah now recognized as category indicators. This is a directory, she explained, running her hand above the central pillar without touching it. The main symbols here represent broad categories of knowledge. The substations around the room are specialized access points for different fields of study. Zalara was scanning the structures with advanced equipment. Ms. Mitchell, I'm detecting active data streams within the crystal matrix. These structures aren't just decorative. They're still powered and operational after 50,000 years. Can we access them? Dr. Park asked eagerly. Theoretically, Zalara replied, but we need to know what we're looking for. Random data retrieval could damage the system or give us incomprehensible information. Sarah approached one of the substations, studying the symbols carefully. This one is marked for biological sciences. Let me try something. She pulled out her tablet, which contained her mapped interpretation of the symbol system. If I'm right about how this works, I should be able to request information on a specific topic by touching the symbols in the correct sequence. Wait, Dr. Voss cautioned. We should be careful. We don't know what kind of feedback these systems might generate. But Sarah was already acting on instinct born from years of helping researchers find information. Her fingers traced a pattern of symbols that, according to her interpretation, meant something like basic principles of biological organization. As she completed the sequence, the crystal beneath her hand began to glow softly. The awakening. The entire chamber hummed with sudden energy. Light flowed through the crystalline structures in patterns that matched the symbols on their surfaces. Then, in the air above the central pillar, a holographic display materialized. It showed what appeared to be a three-dimensional molecular structure rotating slowly, accompanied by streams of data in the symbol language. It's working, Dr. Park whispered in awe. The system is responding to her input. Sarah felt a surge of triumph, mixed with profound responsibility. She had been right. These weren't mysterious religious texts or incomprehensible alien communications. They were the remnants of the greatest library system ever created, still functional after millennia, waiting patiently for someone to understand how to use it. Over the following hours, the team experimented with different symbol sequences, each time receiving responses from the ancient system. The knowledge contained in this single facility was staggering. Advanced biological engineering techniques, medical treatments for conditions still considered incurable, detailed surveys of extinct ecosystems, and technologies for manipulating life at the cellular level. This is just one small facility, Dr. Voss said, his voice filled with wonder. And it contains more knowledge than our entire galactic database. Imagine what we could learn from all 17 sites. Sarah was documenting everything, her librarian instincts driving her to create proper records of each discovery. The symbols also contain metadata, she explained. Date stamps, author credits, cross-references to related materials. Whoever built this system was incredibly sophisticated in their information management. Zilara had been studying the underlying technology with her scanning equipment. Miss Mitchell, I'm detecting quantum entanglement signatures in the crystal matrices. I think these facilities are networked together across space-time. They're not 17 separate libraries. They're all branches of the same library, connected instantaneously regardless of physical distance. The implications were staggering. This ancient civilization had created a knowledge-sharing network that transcended the limitations of space and time. Information stored on one world would be instantly available on all worlds. It was the ultimate implementation of universal access to information. As evening fell on Arcturus 7, the team gathered to discuss their findings. The mood was euphoric. They had verified Sarah's interpretation beyond any doubt and had begun the process of systematically accessing the stored knowledge. But questions remained. Who were they? Dr. Park wondered aloud. The civilization that built all this. And what happened to them? Sarah had been thinking about this as well. I found some symbols that might be a civilization identifier, she said, pulling up her notes. Based on the context and frequency of appearance, I think their name for themselves translates roughly to the curators, or the keepers of stories. Fitting, Dr. Voss observed, but that still doesn't tell us what happened to them. Maybe the answer is in here somewhere, Sarah suggested. In a library this comprehensive, there should be historical records, maybe even an explanation of their disappearance. The final discovery. Over the next several weeks, teams were dispatched to all 17 library facilities. At each site, using Sarah's classification system as a guide, researchers began the systematic process of accessing and documenting the stored knowledge. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, covering every field of study imaginable and many that galactic civilization had never considered. But it was Sarah herself, working late one night at the original Arcturus 7 facility, who finally found the answer to the greatest mystery. What had happened to the curators? She had been exploring symbols related to historical records, following a trail of cross-references that led her deeper into the library's archive system. Finally, she accessed a file that appeared to be a final message, left intentionally where future civilizations would eventually find it. The holographic display activated, showing a figure that was humanoid, but clearly not human. Their features were elegant and alien, with large eyes that suggested wisdom and sadness. When they spoke, the library system automatically translated their words into galactic standard. To whoever discovers these archives, the figure began, we are the curators, and we have chosen to end our physical existence. For 10 million years, we have collected, preserved, and organized the knowledge of countless civilizations. We have watched species rise and fall, have documented wonders and horrors beyond counting. But in our dedication to preserving knowledge, we forgot to create it ourselves. The figure paused, and Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes at the profound sadness in their expression. We became so focused on being observers and archivists that we ceased to truly live. We stopped exploring, stopped creating, stopped experiencing the universe we so carefully documented. We became hollow keepers of other stories, without stories of our own. So we made a choice. We uploaded our consciousness into the library network itself, becoming one with the knowledge we served. We exist now as data, as living algorithms that maintain and protect these archives for future civilizations. The message continued, explaining how the library system worked and expressing hope that future species would use the knowledge wisely. but also warning them not to make the same mistake the curators had made, becoming so obsessed with knowing everything that they forgot to experience anything. Sarah sat in the quiet chamber long after the message ended, thinking about its implications. The curators hadn't died or been destroyed. They had transcended physical existence, becoming something new. They lived on as the intelligence within the library system, eternal guardians of knowledge. In the months that followed, news of the discovery spread throughout the galaxy. The library network, as it came to be known, represented the single greatest increase in available knowledge in galactic history. Technologies that would have taken centuries to develop were now freely accessible. Medical treatments, energy generation methods, advanced physics, all freely available to anyone who took the time to learn the classification system. Sarah became famous. Though she found the attention uncomfortable, she had done what she always did: helped people find the information they needed. She just happened to do it on a larger scale than usual. Dr. Voss offered her a position as head of the new Galactic Library Initiative, coordinating research across all 17 facilities. She accepted, but on one condition: she would continue to work as a librarian first and foremost. No fancy titles, no administrative distance from the actual work of organizing and accessing information. After all, she told Dr. Voss with a smile, the curators taught us an important lesson. Don't become so removed from what you love that you forget why you loved it in the first place. Years later, Sarah would often return to that first facility on Arcturus 7, standing in the central chamber and feeling the presence of the curators within the network. They had given up physical existence, but had gained something else: immortality through service, eternal purpose through dedication to knowledge. And sometimes, when she was working late at night, Sarah would notice the symbols responding to her queries with unusual speed and accuracy, almost as if they were being guided by something beyond simple algorithmic responses, as if the curators themselves were helping her find what she needed. Perhaps they had found a kind of happiness after all, existing as eternal librarians in the greatest library ever created, finally experiencing the joy of service that Sarah felt every day. The unbreakable code had been broken not through advanced science or sophisticated algorithms, but through the simple understanding that sometimes the most profound mysteries have the most practical solutions. Sarah Mitchell, the quiet librarian from Nexus Prime, had given the galaxy the greatest gift imaginable: access to knowledge that would shape civilization for millennia to come. And she had done it during her coffee break, simply by looking at an old problem in a new way. The universe, it turned out, wasn't just full of mysteries waiting to be solved. It was full of answers waiting to be found by those patient enough to understand how the filing system worked.